About a century ago, writing in the crucible of the early Cold War, American historians were convinced that something ran deep among US citizens, linking them to one another. A national personality or fundamental essence that made Americans American. By some alchemy, as Henry Commager put it, out of the blending of inheritance, environment and experience, there comes a distinctive American character. The very concept of national character went out of fashion in the 1960s when political and cultural events, not to mention challenges from New Left historians, made it harder to think of America in singular terms. There seemed to be too much conflict and diversity to locate a core. Social historians turned away from sweeping claims about all Americans in favor of detailed local studies of specific groups: slaves, pioneers, farmers, mill hands, shopkeepers and immigrants. Suspicious of attempts to plot a unitary tradition, they disavowed not just previous definitions of American character, but the notion of defining one at all. Basically, what is this person saying? He is saying that early in the 50s, that means early Cold War would mean post World War II, people actually thought there was something common to all Americans, but by the time the 60s came around, they realized that they can't look at American character as defined in that sense. There were too many differences within, which means that the earlier definition was not adequate. Secondly, that it was going to be very difficult to actually make the definition at all, considering the amount of differences there were. Okay, so I need a summary that tells me this. A says, a century ago, American historians believed in a national personality that linked all Americans because of their inheritance, environment and experience. But in the 1960s, political and cultural events, including challenges from New Left historians, seemed to disallow this oneness. Preferencing detailed local studies of specific groups over indiscriminate claims of oneness, social historians repudiated the very idea of national character, which means they said you can't even hope to define it. So A more or less adds up to what we've got. Let's just keep that aside. B, a century ago, American historians believed in national personality that linked all Americans because of the blending of inheritance, environment, experience. Blending of? No. Their inheritance, environment, experience gave them one personality. So there's slight distortion here, but still. But in the 1960s, political and cultural events from the New Left historians, no, that's a distortion. So that's out. C, though American historians were convinced about the national character for the oneness of America a half century ago, maybe, the half century is a distortion there. The conflict and diversity by specific groups like so and so, so and so. It's not about the conflict by and diversity by. It's about the conflict between and the diversity between. And immigrants supported by the New Left. We are not saying immigrants supported by the New Left. We are saying that New Left challenges. So this is a distortion again. D, a century ago, American historians believed in national personality that linked all Americans because of their inheritance, environment and experience. But in the 1960s, political and cultural events, including challenges from New Left historians, seemed to disallow this oneness. Social historians suspiciously disavowed the notion of defining one at all, as it turned away from sweeping claims about specific groups. No, they are not saying that the definition turns away from. They are saying, considering the fact that we have differing groups, how could you even hope to define one? And therefore, D draws attention, but the fact of it turned away from sweeping claims is not what we are looking at. So A is the correct answer.